Why would cast members who were so close they practically became sisters suddenly become so distant? The Facts of Life wasn't just one of the most beloved shows of the 80s. It was a show that influenced an entire generation. For years, they were America's sweethearts. Four young girls growing up on screen, making us laugh, cry, and feel a little less alone. Everyone knew them, and everyone loved their bond. But then, suddenly, they vanished. Not just from the spotlight, but from each other's lives. After the lights dimmed and the final scenes aired, the Facts of Life cast members said goodbye to each other immediately, with a silence that lasted for decades, leaving everyone to wonder what had happened behind the scenes of that heartwarming show. The truth is finally out, and when you find out the real reason behind their separation, you'll be completely shocked. The rise of Facts of Life. The Facts of Life was one of those television shows that had the power to influence an entire generation. It was more than just a TV show, it became a cultural phenomenon. But behind that catchy theme song and cheerful tone was a shocking story that never came to light till many years after the show ended. While the girls and their house mother made the world laugh, behind the scenes, they were going through something so shocking that most fans of the show never realized. But how did it all start? You see, before The Facts of Life even became a hit, there was another show that was already charming audiences titled Diff'rent Strokes. It was one of the biggest sitcoms of the late 70s, featuring a wealthy white man raising two African-American boys from Harlem. The show was smart, funny, and had a lot of heart. But more importantly for this story, it had a character named Edna Garrett, the family's live-in housekeeper, played by actress Charlotte Rae. Charlotte Rae was a seasoned comedy actress who had been around for years. On Diff'rent Strokes, her character was more than just comic relief. She brought warmth, wisdom, and a maternal vibe that stood out. The producers realized that Charlotte Rae's character had potential beyond the Drummond household, and so they decided to build a whole new show around her. In 1979, Norman Lear's production company, the same team behind massive television hits, launched The Facts of Life. The show followed Mrs. Garrett as she left the Drummond family to become a house mother at a girls' boarding school called Eastland Academy. At first glance, it sounded like a simple spin-off, but no one could have predicted just how big the show would become or how rocky the road would be to get there. When The Facts of Life premiered, it had a large ensemble cast, maybe too large. There were about 7 girls introduced in the first season, and each one was supposed to represent a different type of character. You had the tomboy, the nerd, the rich girl, the shy one, and so on. But with so many personalities crammed into one show, none of them had the time to truly stand out. The original cast included girls like Molly Ringwald, who played Molly Parker. But the network executives weren't thrilled with the direction of the first season. The ratings were soft, and the show didn't have a clear identity yet. The jokes weren't landing the way they should, and it felt more like a collection of teen stereotypes than a tight-knit group of characters. So, they made a bold decision after Season 1 to fire most of the cast, and just like that, nearly all the girls were written off, including Molly Ringwald. It was a shocking and drastic move, but it worked. Out of all the original girls, only 3 were kept. Lisa Whelchel, who played the glamorous and sometimes snobby Blair Warner; Kim Fields, the feisty and smart-mouthed Tootie Ramsey; and Mindy Cohn, who played the bubbly and kind-hearted Natalie Green. But the producers knew they needed one more person to round out the group. They wanted someone with grit and depth to balance out Blair's vanity and Natalie's cheerfulness. And that's when they brought in Nancy McKeon as Jo Polniacek, the tough girl from the Bronx with a motorcycle and an attitude. Nancy McKeon didn't join until Season 2, but the moment she stepped onto the screen, everything changed. Jo wasn't like the other girls. She was street-smart, sarcastic, and had real emotional layers. And the chemistry between her and Blair was completely electric. they became instant frenemies, constantly bickering but slowly building mutual respect. And just like that, The Facts of Life had found its magic formula. After the cast shakeup, the show's tone completely shifted in a good way. It wasn't just about teen hijinks anymore. Instead, it had begun to tackle real-life issues that young girls were dealing with. Issues like body image, peer pressure, racism, death, food-related issues, and even inappropriate behavior. It was still a sitcom, but it finally had heart and guts. And the audience responded. By its third and fourth seasons, The Facts of Life was climbing the ratings. Fans were tuning in not just for the laughs, but for the emotional moments, the life lessons, and the growing relationships between the characters. Charlotte Rae's character, Mrs. Garrett, remained the heart of the show, always ready with a warm hug or a life lesson. But now, the girls around her were shining just as brightly. The audiences watched them grow up and saw them go through real-life issues, from cheating on tests to body image, peer pressure, divorce, and more. And unlike many sitcoms at the time, The Facts of Life didn't always wrap things up neatly with a bow. Sometimes it left the audience with questions or a lesson that didn't even have a perfect answer. And that honesty was part of what gave the show such a loyal following. What made the show feel even more special was the real bond that grew among the core cast members off-screen. Lisa Whelchel, Kim Fields, Mindy Cohn, and Nancy McKeon weren't just co-workers. They had become close friends. In fact, Charlotte Rae, in interviews, often said that the chemistry on set was genuine. The girls supported each other through awkward teenage years, bad hair days, and early fame. They worked together for nearly a decade, and during those years, they really did grow up in front of America. That closeness wasn't just nice to see. It actually helped the show succeed. Everyone could feel it in the way the girls talked to each other, teased each other, and cried with each other. It was natural and believable, and this gave their scenes a special kind of magic. The Facts of Life went from almost getting canceled to becoming one of the longest-running sitcoms of the 80s. And although the rise of the show was nothing short of magical, as the seasons rolled on and the spotlight grew hotter, something quietly shifted behind the scenes. Not everything was as picture-perfect as it seemed, and when the show finally ended, the world got to realize the truth. What really went on once the cameras stopped rolling? And how did a show that brought so many together end with decades of silence? The challenges behind the scenes. As The Facts of Life gained momentum and became a staple in American television, the glow of success started to cast some disturbing shadows behind the scenes. On the surface, the show was bright and bubbly, a feel-good story of friendship and life lessons wrapped in 80s charm. But behind those perfectly timed punchlines and heartfelt moments was a growing web of pressure, change, and emotional strain that not even the fans could see coming. For the young cast, most of whom were barely teenagers when the show began, the show quickly became more than just a job. It basically became their whole world. Week after week, they weren't just delivering lines, they were growing up in front of millions of people. And sadly, that kind of fame, especially at such a young age, doesn't come without a cost. The spotlight doesn't just shine, it exposes. Every move, every word, and every change in appearance was noticed, commented on, and sometimes criticized. Lisa Whelchel, who played the wealthy and prim Blair Warner, had to deal with the pressure to maintain the perfect image that Blair represented. She was expected to be effortlessly glamorous, polished, and confident, not just on screen, but off-screen too. That pressure got heavier as the show became more popular. Any fluctuation in weight, hairstyle, or even mood could spark whispers, tabloid stories, or stern talks from producers. And Lisa wasn't the only one feeling the squeeze. Kim Fields, who played the spunky and lovable Tootie, had her own battles. She was cast at an extremely young age, and was immediately thrust into a world where she had to grow up fast. She had braces and had to wear roller skates in the early episodes to make her appear taller than she was. It was fun until it wasn't anymore. Being the youngest in the cast meant everyone expected her to stay cute and cheerful. Even when she was growing into a teenager and naturally craving more serious storylines and more respect as a young woman. And then there was Mindy Cohn, the fan favorite Natalie Green. Mindy wasn't even an actress when she was discovered by Charlotte Rae and the producers while they were doing research at a real girls' school, but her natural charm and wit made her an instant star. As the seasons went on, Mindy faced a different kind of challenge, one related to her body. You see, unlike the other girls, Mindy didn't fit the traditional Hollywood beauty mold. She was constantly reminded, subtly and sometimes not so subtly, of this fact. This took a toll on her confidence, and instead of enjoying her success, she probably felt like she had to apologize for simply being herself. And while Nancy McKeon didn't join the show until the second season, her character, Jo Polniacek, quickly became one of the most beloved. Jo was tough, sarcastic, and cool, and the chemistry between Nancy and Lisa on screen was electric. But with that chemistry came the constant comparisons. Fans and media often pitted the characters, and by extension, the actresses, against each other. While Lisa and Nancy maintained a professional relationship, the pressure to outshine each other on screen sometimes seeped into real life. Nancy also had to deal with the same set of challenges and pressures that the other girls were dealing with. She once said, "When you think about the fact that you are recording somebody's puberty, I mean from 14 to, early 20s, that period, there's so much development. There's so many things that you're going through. Each one of us had to deal with things in our own way and things that were brought to us." But the producers weren't blind to the changes the girls were going through. But that didn't mean they always handled it gently. As the show aged, so did the cast, and that created a whole new set of issues. The teenagers became young adults, their bodies changed, and their personalities evolved. But sadly, the producers still wanted to package them as the same wholesome girls from Eastland School. And this created some serious tension. When one of the girls gained or lost weight, or when someone wanted to try a new haircut, it became a topic of discussion, not just personally, but professionally. What should have been private decisions suddenly had career consequences. There were even wardrobe meetings where producers would scrutinize how the girls looked on camera, because it wasn't just about fashion anymore. It was about control. The girls were being molded, groomed, and packaged for mass appeal. And while they smiled on camera, many were silently struggling off camera to maintain that TV version of themselves. Charlotte Rae, the matriarch of the show, saw what was happening. She adored the girls and treated them like her own, but even she had her limits. By the seventh season, Charlotte decided to step back from the show. She felt it was time to pass the torch, both for her own health and because she believed the younger cast could carry the weight. But her departure was also a quiet reflection of how much things had changed. What started as a show about a lovable house mother and her students had become something much more complicated. But that's not the only challenge. Adding to the strain were the long working hours. Sitcoms might look fun and breezy on screen, but the production schedule was grueling. Rehearsals, rewrites, fittings, and tapings could go on for hours, sometimes late into the night. And for teenagers juggling work, fame, and growing up, it was a lot to carry. Personal lives took a back seat. Friendships outside the set faded. School was either on set or squeezed into rare breaks, and their whole lives revolved around the facts of life. And the emotional toll didn't stop there. As the seasons went on, the show had its share of ups and downs in ratings. Every dip brought new panic. Was the show still relevant? Were the girls still popular? Would the network pull the plug? These questions lingered constantly in the air, creating an environment of quiet anxiety. Fans never saw the fatigue, the conflict, or the emotional exhaustion. They saw the laughter, the lessons, and the strong friendships. And to be fair, the cast did love each other in their own way, but love doesn't mean easy. As the show pushed forward, year after year, those unspoken frustrations grew louder in private. So while the facts of life gave audiences a world of laughter and friendship, behind the curtain, the very people who brought it to life were navigating a reality far more complex. Pressure from the industry, pressure from fans, pressure from within. And it would take decades before some of those wounds would begin to heal. The end of an era. By the late 80s, the facts of life had lasted almost a full decade, which is something few shows ever manage. For a show that started as a spin-off with a wobbly first season and a rotating cast of young girls, making it all the way to 9 seasons was nothing short of remarkable. But no matter how beloved a series becomes, there comes a time when the curtains have to close. For the facts of life, that moment came in 1988, quietly, without much fanfare, and under circumstances that said more than words ever could. The truth is, the show had changed a lot. What began as a story about a group of teenage girls at a private school had, by its final season, transformed into something else entirely. The girls were no longer girls. They were grown women living together, running a business, and trying to figure out adulthood. The teenage charm that had originally made the show so relatable was naturally fading, and no amount of script rewrites could recapture that original spark. The writers did their best. They introduced new characters, gave the women more mature plot lines, and tried to keep the humor fresh. But television was shifting. By the late 80s, viewers were starting to gravitate toward edgier comedies, faster pacing, and new faces. Ratings slipped, and so did network confidence. The show wasn't canceled with drama. It was simply not renewed. But even before the final credits rolled, the cast members themselves were changing in ways that made the ending inevitable. Lisa Whelchel, who had played Blair Warner since day one, had already begun distancing herself from the Hollywood scene. Always a devout Christian, Lisa found the pressure to play provocative roles deeply uncomfortable. In fact, she had even turned down a particular provocative script for an episode in Season 2 and also asked to be written out of another episode in Season 9, saying, "That's not something I can be a part of. I know young girls are watching this show, and that's not the kind of decision that can really be covered in 17 minutes and a couple of commercials." Once the show ended, she took a different path. She married Stephen Cobble, a pastor, and began a new chapter of her life, one rooted in motherhood, ministry, and faith-based speaking engagements. Although she reportedly appeared in some rom-coms, it felt like she had walked away from Hollywood completely. She rarely gave interviews about the facts of life, and when she did, it was usually brief and polite. For reunions, press appearances, and nostalgic documentaries, Lisa showed up, but not always. To many fans, she had simply vanished. But in truth, she hadn't vanished. She had just chosen a life that felt more honest to who she was. Nancy McKeon, on the other hand, leaned into the industry, but on her own terms. Joe Polniacek had made her a household name, but Nancy was determined to prove she was more than just the leather-jacketed tomboy. After the facts of life, she pursued a serious acting career with impressive focus. She took on dramatic roles in made-for-TV movies, tackled tough subjects like domestic violence and mental health, and stayed far away from the sitcom bubble that had defined her early years. Nancy also kept a low profile when it came to the rest of the cast. She rarely appeared in interviews or reunions. When the Facts of Life cast had a public reunion in 2001, Nancy was notably absent due to scheduling conflicts. Some took it as a snub, but others figured she just wanted to be known for something beyond Joe. Mindy Cohn's post-show life was a mix of unexpected turns and quiet strength. After playing Natalie Green, she found a second career that surprised a lot of people, and it was voice acting. Most notably, she became the voice of Velma Dinkley in the Scooby-Doo franchise, a role she played for over a decade. Behind the mic, she didn't have to worry about looks, public pressure, or being typecast. It was creative freedom, and it gave her space to just be herself. But in later years, Mindy revealed a battle that was far more personal than anything she'd ever faced on TV. In 2017, she went public with the news that she had been fighting breast cancer. She'd undergone multiple surgeries, chemotherapy, and even a double mastectomy, all while keeping it private. She had quietly leaned on a few close friends during that time, but even then, not all of her former castmates knew what she was going through because the distance between them had grown that wide. Kim Fields, meanwhile, never stopped working. Of all the cast members, Kim probably had the most seamless transition from child star to adult actor. After The Facts of Life, she took time to attend college, earned her degree, and then stepped right back into the industry, this time behind the camera as well as in front of it. She directed episodes of hit shows like Kenan and Kel, Tyler Perry's House of Pain, and Meet the Browns. But even Kim, the one who seemed to keep in touch with everyone, had long stretches of time where she didn't speak to her former co-stars at all. That's the part fans didn't see coming. For a show that was all about friendship, loyalty, and sisterhood, the real-life distance between the cast after the finale was a little heartbreaking. There was no dramatic falling out or major feud, but just years of cold silence. Some of the cast didn't speak to each other for over 2 decades, not even for big public events like award show tributes or reunion specials. When Charlotte Rae passed away in 2018, several of the original cast members did show up to honor her. However, hugs were real but a little awkward. Everyone could feel that the warmth was there, but so was the weight of time that had passed. Fans who grew up watching the show hoped for a full reunion with all the girls together again, sharing stories and laughing like old times. But that never truly happened. There were many reunions here and there, but it was never quite complete. Nancy McKeon often remained the missing piece. Lisa Whelchel showed up more in later years, but stayed selective about which appearances she'd do. But what really caused that distance? Why did a cast that once felt like family drift so far apart, even skipping reunions and barely keeping in touch? The answer isn't simple, and it goes deeper than most fans ever realized. The reason for the distance. Even though The Facts of Life ended back in 1988, the love for it never really faded. Fans kept watching reruns, teen magazines kept running old photos, and as the 80s nostalgia hit full force in the 2010s, calls for a reunion only got louder. Over the years, there were a few small reunions. In 2001, the cast reunited for a made-for-TV movie called The Facts of Life Reunion. It aired on ABC and featured Blair, Natalie, Tootie, and even Mrs. Garrett, though Nancy McKeon, who played Jo, was noticeably missing. She said at the time that she was busy with other projects, but fans couldn't help but wonder if there was more to it. Then, in 2014, some of the women appeared on The Today Show for a special throwback segment. Lisa Whelchel, Mindy Cohn, and Kim Fields sat on the couch, laughing, reminiscing, and telling old stories. Again, Nancy wasn't there, and once again, it raised eyebrows. After all, by that point, it had been more than 25 years since the show ended. Why was it still so hard to get all 4 women in the same room? Behind the scenes, several reunion efforts had actually been pitched and failed. There were talks of documentaries, panel discussions, and even fan conventions. Some got close to happening, but something always fell through. Scheduling conflicts were often blamed, but privately, insiders knew it ran deeper than that. It wasn't just about timing. it was about feelings that had never really been dealt with. And those feelings had been building for decades. Things got more complicated after Mindy Cohn suddenly shocked fans around the world with a revelation. She said the reboot efforts had failed because one particular co-star, who was being greedy, had gone behind their backs to speak to ask for her own spin-off instead of the reboot. When they all found out, they were all hurt, and the trust between them was broken. Mindy said there was a lot of drama, and that after that, any plans for a reboot were shelved permanently. Lisa, on the other hand, confirmed Mindy's revelations, but spoke up on the other reasons for the reboot cancellation, saying, "We'd been trying to find a way to work together in some capacity for probably the last 10 years. So, when it looked like this was going to happen, we were all really excited. The contracts were signed, and then the writers' strike happened, the actors' strike happened, and then, unfortunately, Charlotte Rae and Norman Lear passed. After that, it just kind of dissolved." Although Lisa's reply was far softer than that of Mindy, they both left a lot of questions in the hearts of fans. Which of the girls had sabotaged the reboot plans? But that's not the only reason why the girls distanced themselves from each other for years. There was the emotional fatigue that came with the job. Being a child or teen star is something most people will never fully understand. The pressure, the loss of privacy, and the constant smiling for cameras when you're exhausted or sad or insecure are a lot. And when The Facts of Life became a hit, it didn't just change their careers, it changed their lives, and that takes a toll. When the show ended, many of the cast members needed space, not just from each other, but from the entire experience. Then there were the different values and lifestyles that started to show up as they grew older. Lisa Whelchel, for example, became a deeply devout Christian and entered the world of church speaking, writing books about faith, and even homeschooling her kids. Kim Fields took a more modern, entertainment-based path by starring in sitcoms, directing, and eventually doing reality TV. Nancy McKeon chose privacy. And Mindy Cohn leaned into voice acting, found comfort in creative control, and later dealt with her cancer battle in almost complete silence. They weren't the same anymore. Their lives had taken such drastically different directions that reconnecting wasn't just a matter of calling each other up. They didn't have common ground anymore, other than a show from decades ago. Most fans often overlook the fact that not everyone wants a reunion. Sometimes people walk through a chapter of their lives, and once it's done, they don't feel the urge to go back. For the women of The Facts of Life, they spent nearly a decade together. That's longer than most people spend in college or at one job. They laughed together, cried together, grew up together. But when it ended, so did the need to keep that going. And maybe that's not a bad thing. The Facts of Life wasn't just another 80s sitcom. It was a show that helped define a generation, one that dared to talk about growing up, making mistakes, and learning who you really are. And behind the scenes, the girls who played Blair, Jo, Natalie, and Tootie were going through all of that in real life. They shared laughter, tears, pressure, and fame. And when it was all over, they quietly stepped into the next chapters of their lives, separately. But do you think something more disturbing happened between the cast of The Facts of Life? Tell us in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, click on the next video on your screen, like this video,